I am going to walk you through my vulnerability assessment project, focusing on a hidden Linux server located on the InfoSec lab environment. The goal was not to just find vulnerabilities, but to truly understand the risk they pose and recommend meaningful ways to strengthen system security. The primary goal of this assessment was to identify vulnerabilities that could threaten the security, integrity, and availability of a hidden Linux server. To do this, I used industry-recognized tools such as Nmap for network scanning and the Greenbone Vulnerability Manager for detailed vulnerability assessment. The scan revealed a total of 46 vulnerabilities. Out of these, 14 were considered high severity, 28 were medium, and a few were low but were not the main focus of this report. This number highlights a critical situation where urgent remediation is necessary. If these vulnerabilities are not addressed quickly, they leave the server wide open to attack, whether through data breaches, system crashes, or even a full takeover by malicious actors. The server was discovered operating on Ubuntu version 8.04. This version of Ubuntu has been unsupported, meaning it no longer receives security patches or updates. This alone places the server at significant risk because any new vulnerabilities discovered since Ubuntu's 8.04 end of life have gone unpatched. Through Nmap, I identified several open ports, including port 21 for FTP, 22 for SSH, 80 for HTTP, 5432 for PostgreSQL, 6200 for the VSFTPD backdoor, and 8009 for the Apache Tomcat AJP connector. Each of these open ports represented a different doorway into the system, some of which were severely misconfigured or hosting outdated services. When you see a combination of outdated software and open vulnerable services, it paints a clear picture of poor system maintenance and lack of basic cybersecurity hygiene. Now let's focus on the three most dangerous vulnerabilities identified. The most critical issues were the presence of default credentials on the PostgreSQL database, a known backdoor in the VSFTPD FTP server, and a remote code execution vulnerability in Apache Tomcat's AJP connector, commonly referred to as GhostCat. Starting with the PostgreSQL issue, I found that the database service was still using its default administrative account with a weak or empty password. In cybersecurity, default credentials are one of the easiest attack vectors for hackers. If an attacker knows the service is running and tries common default usernames and passwords, they can often gain full administrative access without even needing to exploit a technical flaw. This would allow unauthorized users to view, modify, or delete critical data stored within the database. The remediation for this issue is straightforward yet vital. We would immediately update the Postgres user's password to something strong and unique and restrict access to the pghba.conf file, which controls authentication methods. The second high severity issue involved a malicious backdoor embedded within the VSFTPD FTP server. Version 2.3.4 of VSFTPD contained a backdoor that, when connected to port 6200, allows an attacker to execute arbitrary shell commands as root. This vulnerability is particularly dangerous because it requires minimal skill to exploit, and it can also lead to a complete system compromise almost instantly. The only effective solution is to uninstall the vulnerable VSFTPD package entirely and replace it with a clean, verified, and patched version. It also serves as a reminder that even trusted open source software can be weaponized if not monitored and maintained properly. The third major finding involved the Apache Tomcat server. I discovered the server was vulnerable to GhostCat, a remote code execution flaw through the Tomcat AJP connector on port 8009. This exploit allows attackers to read or manipulate files on the server and execute arbitrary code in certain misconfigured environments. The solution here involves updating Apache Tomcat to version 7.0.100, 8.5.51, 9.0.31 or newer, depending on the version family, and disabling or securing the AJP connector if it is not absolutely necessary for operation. Beyond those three, other vulnerabilities were just as concerning. The distributed Ruby service was configured insecurely, exposing it to remote code execution attacks because it trusted connections without proper verification. The installed version of Twiki was highly outdated and vulnerable to cross-site scripting and remote execution, potentially allowing attackers to inject malicious scripts and gain administrative control. Finally, an ingress lock backdoor was found operating on port 1524, providing a hidden remote access method for attackers. These issues clearly demonstrate that the server suffered not just from isolated weakness, but from poor cybersecurity practices. Although medium severity vulnerabilities may not seem as urgent, when combined, they significantly affect a system's security. The server accepted outdated SSL and TLS versions like SSL v2 and SSL v3, which are no longer considered secure. It also allowed connections using weak cipher suites, exposing it to cryptographic attacks like the Beast and Poodle attacks. FTP login credentials were being transmitted in clear text, making it possible for an attacker monitoring the network to intercept usernames and passwords. Lastly, weak SSH host keys allowed attackers to potentially spoof trusted connections. Taken together, these issues would make it very easy for a moderately skilled attacker to escalate their access once they have a foothold. In order to secure this server, a comprehensive remediation plan is necessary. The first and most critical step is to upgrade the operating system from Ubuntu 8.04 to a currently supported long-term support version like Ubuntu 22.04. Without an updated OS, it's impossible to guarantee future security. Next, all vulnerable or outdated services must be updated, secured, or replaced entirely. Encryption protocols must be strengthened to only allow TLS 1.2 or higher, and weak cipher suites must be disabled. Administrative credentials must be reviewed and secured with strong password policies, and all default accounts must be either deleted or secured. Security hardening should become a routine process. For this assessment, I relied heavily on Nmap for port discovery and service identification. Nmap allowed me to build an initial map of the server's attack surface by highlighting open ports and running services. Following this, I used the Greenbone Vulnerability Manager to perform in-depth vulnerability scanning. Greenbone uses the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS, to categorize vulnerabilities based on severity, allowing for a prioritized response. Additionally, Greenbone considers the quality of detection, ensuring that only findings with a high degree of confidence were treated as critical. In conclusion, the vulnerability assessment revealed that the hidden Linux server is in a critically dangerous state. Without urgent remediation, the system is highly likely to be exploited by attackers. The combination of outdated software, poor maintenance, and widespread vulnerabilities creates the perfect storm for a serious security incident. However, by following the remediation steps I outlined, including upgrading the OS, patching critical services, and hardening network and authentication configurations, the server's security can be significantly improved. This project not only exposed technical weaknesses, but emphasized the importance of continuous vigilance and maintenance in cybersecurity.